Kelly.
Okay.
So, here with Kelly, and Kelly, why don't you introduce yourself instead of
Sure.
me introducing you?
So I am a licensed therapist and an organizational strategist all around burnout. I live for this kind of topic and workplace wellness and how to just be more inclusive. So I have 15 years experience as a licensed clinician, and I am the host on this platform of the Black Girl Burnout podcast. So I am excited to be here.
That's right. And I got to tell you, Black Girl Burnout every week, it's gaining so much traction. It's
So
really,
excited.
yeah, it's really finding its audience. I'm so excited about it. And then, of course, I run Amplify Voices, a media company founded by Pete Carroll. And we are out for podcasts that you're able to just get on open platforms like Apple or Spotify. We're all about where caring meets action and the kind of ways that we can really frame what we need for ourselves around our being and not just all of the focus of doing. And then in the enterprise world, because we're stepping now into enterprise podcasting and audio series, and that is all around where caring meets performance. So being able to build those teams. And then, of course, my pets will appear at any point in time because they also want to be part of the conversation. But I thought it was a really important topic to jump in on with regard what happened to the Estee Lauder executive who was fired after the Instagram post. So if you all who are listening to it now or at some point listen or watch this and you don't know what post I'm talking about, you can easily Google Estee Lauder firing Instagram post and you will be aghast, just like the rest of us. But that's not really the point of this conversation. That just has fueled an opportunity for this conversation, which is not whether that's right or wrong and what we think about whether or not that person should have been fired or taken through some kind of disciplinary action. What happened and Estee Lauder's choices are on them. But what I believe is important as an opportunity to work through and discuss through your lens of your expertise, Kelly, is really the impact that it has on us. And for those of us that are also leading teams every day, we know that they see these kind of headlines, and especially when it's tied to racism and organizations where we're frequent buyers of and have been longtime consumers of. And for many of us, I know we look at things like that and the outward communication is, doesn't surprise me at all. These things are happening every single day. But we have to remember that not only for us as leaders in our own psychological processing of it, and also the people that we're accountable for in our companies and in our teams, there is an impact. There's a psychological impact. And as organizations are so focused on psychological safety and being able to be mindful of the micro racism, microaggressions, all the kind of categories of these paper cuts that happen every single day, first of all, let's talk about the impact that these kind of headlines and these kind of seeing things in our social feeds, seeing these as headlines as we go every morning as business professionals to kind of read what's the latest news. Talk about, for us, what is the impact that we don't even notice is the impact?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to how I define burnout. And I think you said that yourself when you said it's these thousands of cuts, right? Like burnout is cumulative and there's different types. And one of the ways that people get burned out even quicker is when they experience microaggressions. And that's because it not necessarily is even something overt, although this post is, but it wasn't directed at maybe an individual looking at the post, right? It is just the context with which it's one more thing on top of other things. And then you tie into one of the definitions of psychological safety. A part of the definition is that someone can feel free to show up as who they are. And the messaging that you get when you scroll through and you see these kinds of things, these posts or conversations, is that it reminds you that you're not safe to be who you are, that people still have an opinion or that racism still exists. And it doesn't matter who posted it or their intention. It's about the impact of the person receiving it. And so it becomes one more way where someone feels invalidated, feels unheard, feels the burden and the pain of racism. And the impact it has is it slowly deteriorates. It's like a death by 1,000 cuts. It's not that you're going to see a post necessarily and not be able to go to work today. But what we see, and what I'm sure you've seen with other people, is you will run into people, particularly of color, that will say, this is the one thing that now I need to take a break. I'm not okay to go into work now. I am angry, because it triggers anger. And then of course in work, we often code switch. So we can't have these conversations. And a lot of workplaces haven't made it safe to have the conversation that I'm not feeling okay today. So you have to kind of repress that feeling and push through. And this culminates in burnout, and it culminates in, for some folks, true psychological distress, like true depression symptoms, true anxiety symptoms. So it has a huge impact. Little things, when they add up, have large impact.
Yeah, it's interesting, because as a leader, when I see them, I'm so conscious and conscientious of, in terms of like my own self-care, my own like, so much of my job is lined up around not only empowering my team and being there for my team, but also what we're building, that we're putting, we have all this content, and that we're bringing things to leaders and managers, and diversity, equality, inclusion, and belonging. And health and well-being. These are categories that we are every single day inside of. What are the issues, and how can we frame it, and what kind of content can we deliver? So I'm so wrapped up in a space of messaging and empowering messaging and being of service and all of that. And I have to tell you, when I see this, I can tell that my immediate outward reaction is, ugh, what a dum-dum, or whatever, that kind of response, to be like, how ridiculous. Didn't they know? They're accountable for a company. They're a very, very high, like whatever the logic, I would say. So it's very this way up of just logic. But I notice that I can be in this great space, if you will, and being in action. And I start to, when I see a couple of these, they sit on my mind. I think about them without thinking about them. And I start to feel a tinge of fatigue, or even the little bits of the beginning of apathy about, where I'm not saying to myself, why am I even doing this? But it's kind of there informing me, like the kind of a running statement, like a ticker statement, like everything you're doing is not making any difference. And I don't believe that. I don't hold myself within that framework. It takes so much of me to give up. In fact, I don't even know a time where I'm committed to these things for so long. But I now know and can see that happening, and I slow it down and I take care of myself. So I'd love to know first, what are some of the ways in which we as leaders that are required, it's part of our accountability, to have ourselves inside of these headlines, to know what's going on, and then to get these constant, nonstop, headlines around racism and other accountable companies, or supposedly accountable companies, where these things are happening. First, how do we take care of ourselves and be able to move through the spaces? And then let's go how we take care of our teams.
Okay. Yes. So when we're talking about yourself as a leader, part of it is, particularly if you're connected, right? Like you personally are invested, that is offensive to you based upon your identity, your chosen identity. Yes. It's really important to take the pause, even though you think at that moment it's not hitting you. Like you did a really great job of explaining. In the moment, you're like, that's fine. And then you feel it a little later. It's really important to take the moment right when it's happening, right? When you see the post, and decide. Like, one of the things that I say, I use for myself, is I say, I will not receive this. And I unpack what that means for me when I say I will not receive it. It doesn't mean it's not offensive. To be very clear, it doesn't mean it's inappropriate, but that I will not let that into myself to be able to become a weight. And it's not just affirming that, it's also in practice with other things. But the other thing I do right away is, like, I take a deep breath, and then I may pause. If I'm in the middle of something, I may not be able to do that, but I may pause the minute I have and engage in some quick self-care, whether it's a conversation with a friend, whether it's listening to some music you really like, moving your body a little bit. I'm talking 5 minutes. That routine of I do not receive it, you say it out loud. And when you can, take a pause and do 5 minutes of self-care will go a long way. And just saying those words. So that's what I would tell a leader to do, because we often only have 5 minutes, let's be clear, to just be able to do something. For teams, it's really all about making space. And I want to be clear about what I say by making space, because what's happened is well-meaning folks have said, let's make space. They sit in a circle and they say, the N word was said today. Who wants to talk about how they feel about that? And some people do not feel safe enough to do so, right, and do not want to talk about it. So making space is different for everyone. So what you say when you're making space is you just say, there are things going on in the news right now that are weighing on us. And I want you to know that there's space for you to take care of yourself today. If you need a little extra time to take care of yourself or do different things, including my door being open to you as an option, but I want you to take time to make space and take care of yourself how you need to today. And just check in if you need something. That way it's not prescriptive. It gives people autonomy to make their own choices about how they want to take care of themselves. And it's very different than saying, let's sit in a circle and deconstruct this, if you don't have the time to bring in an expert and you yourself are like, I'm trying to deconstruct for myself, much less the team.
That's really great, because I know that a lot of times people will say, leaders that are accountable for other people, either with our peers, like the other executives or managers, or with our team as we're 5 minutes before the call starts, or 2 minutes, 2 minutes before, and some of us are early. There's an automatic way, what I can see in my past, where something would affect me. I would have that thing like, whatever, and then go on with my day. But I hadn't dealt with it for myself, taking that 1 minute, that 5 minutes, saying, just like what you said, I will not receive this. A good one for me is, I still believe in people.
Yep.
Right. I mean, that's a big one for me, because when I get a number of these paper cuts, I'm like, oh, I hate people. If this world only just had dogs and cats and a few of us, we'd be okay. Right. And I know there's no difference that can be made there. That's not empowering to me. So catching myself and take care of myself, because when we don't, what I notice that we do is we're on that call or we're talking to somebody. We're like, did you see that post? Did you see XYZ? And what we're doing to me is we're then exchanging trauma.
Yes.
Right? Because I didn't deal with it effectively. Now I'm putting it in your space. So either you saw it and now we're going to talk about it in a way that's not psychologically constructive, if that's even a term. Yes. Or you're going to say, no, I didn't see what happened. And now I've put something in your space. We talk about it. I'm like, oh, got to start the call. And then we jump on the call. Now you're stuck with it. I'm stuck with it. And now we're both burdened by that. And then the fatigue starts to set in at some point. So I think that's an important thing that I notice now. I've never been constructed or constituted around being a gossipy kind of personality, no right or wrong. I just am not kind of that. I've never been that kind of person. Not a moral compass. I'm just not a casual talker. I guess I'm typically talking about things that I'm doing and want to hear what people are doing. I've always been that way. But I do notice that. And I think that is like almost like a form of gossip, except you're not talking about really anything else. You're sort of reinstituting the damage that you feel without actually, in a healthy way, saying, I checked in with myself and I just feel like it was a moment of betrayal to my own happiness. And that's what I experienced. Just being able to give language to what I really felt underneath, and what was underneath that, and what was underneath that. And then that's where it is. It just hurt my heart that I read that. And I just needed to say that. And now I have said it and I can go on. But I think that's the important part, is really being mindful of our casual exchanges with each other on the teams, because it is really like spreading a virus. Maybe that's not the good time to say something like that, but you know what I mean?
No, it's opening a wound to me. Like, that's what I say. It's opening wounds you can't close. When you do that kind of drive by, here's what happened. And because we don't know who everybody is, everybody copes with things differently. Do you really want to open a painful topic because you haven't dealt with it, right? And spill it onto others. And then everyone else is like, okay, well, it's 2 minutes to now we got to switch immediately into whatever the topic is. And so you are potentially opening wounds for people that you cannot close. And so that's why giving people a team space and just acknowledging that things are going on in the world that are making, and if you do this as a practice, you don't have to wait for an event. I mean, I think that's a crucial part here, is letting people know they always have space because you're aware that the world is difficult on many levels these days. And then giving them resources. Like, here's space for you to take care of how you need to take care of yourself. And here's some resources, whether it's your employee assistance program or whatever you have built in to help folks. But you don't want to do that. You don't want to spill, like you said, your trauma or your pain onto others, well-meaning even, just to have that exchange. You don't know the impact that's going to have on somebody. So I completely agree.
Yeah. So let's say that there is a practice that we've put in place as leaders, as managers, and let's just say it's a weekly. I'll just make something up, but you should definitely recommend. But let's just say it's a weekly check-in, about 15 minutes, and you're able to join a Zoom call and communicate about things that you need. I would think, knowing what I know about going in and training teams and building cultures and transforming cultures, is that in our work environment, how we know it, in work culture as a common culture, emotions are not the place you bring to your work environment. So even though there's open door, it's safe to say things, in our minds, we're like, it's absolutely not safe to say these things, because if I do start to talk about them and I get emotional about it, I will be perceived a certain way. Or having someone who is not a person of color or who doesn't understand that, sitting there receiving a communication that we're like, there's no way for you to really understand what it is that I'm experiencing right now. So in that case, I don't feel safe to share this with you and have you check it off on a box that you handled my communication and you did your 15 minutes or what have you. How do we as, I think what's important here is, how do we as leaders and managers of teams, what do you recommend kind of structure do we set up? And how do we present it if you're not a person? I mean, I have a bit of permission, obviously, if you will, when I'm leading my teams and the team is comprised of people of color, Indigenous people, for them to be like, okay, Audrey gets it, to her range of getting it, depending on their background. When you're an HR professional, when you are a manager of an IT department, when you are whatever it is, the executive, the founder of a mid-sized company, being able to set up and say, wow, I don't experience these racism. I'm appalled by it, these incidents. What is your advice to give to them to create that psychologically safe space? Even if it's no one's going to say anything, but just the fact of saying that I care and I'm willing to listen, or that I'm caring, we've structured this time. So I'd love to hear about the structure, and also how do you build that when you are not a person of color?
Yeah, because that can be challenging. So what I would say would be modeling vulnerability and then transparency. And the first part about modeling vulnerability, it's nuanced. It's being able to say that you have feelings, you experience things, you might be struggling yourself without centering yourself in the conversation. So it should really be like 1 to 2 sentences about the fact that I am struggling today. Today is a hard day for me. And modeling that, the world gets to you too, but without getting into it becoming basically a therapy session where you then tell everyone what's going on in your life. And you don't want to do that, right? But you want to model that because we don't bring emotions into the work, that you have feelings too, that you need to, and then modeling it by saying, I'm feeling this way, and this is how I'm taking care of myself. And then the transparency when it comes to issues of race, when you may not be of the racial group or the marginalized identity that's experiencing the harm, is being transparent. I am not here to say that I know what is the right thing to say or do on this issue. I'm here to make space for you to know that I can imagine that you may be struggling. And so I want you to know what your options are. And if it becomes the teams like I am struggling and multiple people are, bring someone in who is equipped. I feel like we burden our leaders by making them think they have to be all things to all people, right? I felt that way when I'm leading teams, but you don't have to be. You just have to care and connect to resources. And I would think the final thing is, if you're not even sure where to start, and that's okay, start with asking people, how are you taking care of yourself in your weekly check-in? I want to know, I want to hear from everyone. How are you taking care of yourself? I'm going to go first and tell you how I'm taking care of myself, and give them permission to do that, because a person of color sitting in the audience may not want to engage on a post, but they are willing to say, I take care of myself, or I'm looking for ideas and ways. And for me, maybe it's my community. And then, you take note, how does that person take care of themselves? And then you help reinforce that. I see you're struggling. You said how you take care of yourself as via community. Have you been connected to your community lately? Like, how can I help you do that so you feel better? That neutralizes the conversation. It doesn't have to be loaded. And everyone's willing to have a conversation around self-care, way more than they're going to want to have a conversation about discrimination or race or issues of that kind.
Right. That's so great. So considering this topic and what we just discussed, is there something that I didn't ask you that you think is important to also add in, or for us to take into consideration as leaders?
That's such a great question, Audrey. There's so many things. No, I tease you. I think really just for leaders is to know that it's small steps. No one's expecting you. I really like messaging to leaders that it's heavy responsibility, but it's not all encompassing. So you don't have to be all things to all people. You just have to show up authentically as yourself and be humble enough to want to learn more, and reach out to the appropriate resources to do so. So when this is happening, and again, I think that the real thing to underscore here is there's always going to be something happening. For people of marginalized and racialized identities, every day there is something that's happening that is probably impacting them. So don't wait till an incident occurs that connects with national news. Start these conversations about how we take care of ourselves and each other as a team today. And then you will see, when these events happen, people feel safe enough to disclose, this is what's bothering me. But you didn't put them on the spot, and you didn't make it a thing that everyone has to do. You start by centering how we take care of each other and how we take care of ourselves. That's the conversation I feel like leaders should start with.
Yeah. And I think that, and I'm going to share something right now that actually happened to me yesterday that I want to highlight, because I want to highlight what you just said about the little things that accumulate every day. So yesterday I was on Amazon to see about an order. And so, how you go on sites like that and it shows you 8 million other things, like you can also order this and this is happening. And, so all of this came up, and I noticed there was a picture. It was really small, but I noticed someone had hair like me. And I thought, oh, is this like a hair care product or something? And when I clicked it, it was a guy, a white guy that had hair like me. I was like, what is this? Right? So I looked, and it said in the heading, you can get this clown wig. And I was like, oh, okay. And it was such a, all of it happened in a matter of 3 seconds, Kelly. Okay. But immediately I was like moving past it. I had to get on a call in a moment. So if you were a fly on the wall, you would only see me just clicking and moving and getting ready for a call. But internally, what was going on was, I cannot believe Amazon, hasn't anybody complained about this? In these days and times, I had this whole worked up scenario. And these when you say they happen all day long, people think it's just like racist comments. This was an Amazon moment where I wasn't even shopping for anything. And it was so out of left field, but it's the kind of things that are just happen during the course of the day. I picked up my mail, somebody stops me, asks me for my key. Do I really live here? Like those kind of things I can just point to during a course of the day, the kind of things that happen. So when I think this is really important, I want to highlight this before we close this conversation. And that is something that I've been speaking to a lot of managers about, especially around training and development and what they're looking for. HR teams are looking for their people. And I said, not that big workshops and these kind of efforts aren't great and still will continue to be powerful. But when you are in a state of high pressure and overwhelm, you don't need a large body of content in how to work your way out of it. What you need are everyday little adjustments, every day, easy to grab, easy to remember tools, and the explanation as you process that and you're utilizing it, what kind of feelings, what kind of new insights, what do you do with that information? How do you share that information? This kind of things, which I think is so important about just being able to get the both of us and jump on when I know that for many of us to have seen that headline, there is residual emotional impact. And so this is just one of those things to grab 25 minutes with Audrey and Kelly, given both our expertise, looking at it from two different ways, and to just say, hey, managers, leaders, HR, think again. These little micro moments also on the other side need to receive micro processing, micro action, micro reframing, so that we can basically be able to process them and metabolize these moments as they go, instead of holding them in and getting to that point of fatigue.
100%.
All right.
The better.
Well, that's it. That's our closing. Kelly, thank you so much for grabbing this moment with me and being able to have this conversation. And anyone who's listening at any point in time, get a hold of Black Girl Burnout on any of the podcast platforms. Kelly is just extraordinary. It's just 10 to 15 minutes of Kelly several times a week, just being able to give insightful, meditative processing, exactly what we're talking about, being able to give a little moment of time for self-care and mental health. And then anything on the Amplify Voices podcasts are all focused around leadership, management, communication, self-care, all of it. So thank you, Kelly. I will see you tomorrow, I think.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow. Thank you so much. And Wendy, thank you so much for navigating this. And goodbye, everybody.
Take care.